Good afternoon and welcome to the post-lunch session. I want to start by thanking the organisers for the invitation to speak as part of the Dark Mofo Festival. My name is Shaun, and as highlighted in the program, I am the senior pastor of a vibrant Pentecostal church situated right here in Hobart. A church that at its very core is focused on not only meeting people where they're at, but by being prepared to walk the journey with them. It is somewhat understandable if for some there is a sense of apprehension around a church leader speaking as part of what is known as the Dark and Dangerous Thoughts program. And conversely, there may be others who may be saying that being a Christian in today's society is in fact a dangerous practice. It was C.S. Lewis who said, "If you want a religion to make you feel comfortable, I certainly don't recommend Christianity." Although raised in a family whereby church was part of my life, I didn't grow up yearning to be a church pastor. In fact, I spent 21 years working as a critical care paramedic in places like Western Sydney and Canberra, as well as stints in developing countries like the Solomon Islands. And more recently, I spent 5 years implementing an aeromedical program in a Middle Eastern country, which at its very core deeply embraces its Islamic roots, yet is fascinated by the lure of westernised culture, which many would still argue is rooted in Christianity. The title of my message, as referred to in the program, is Why I'm Pentecostal. And the challenge today as a church leader is that my platform and my life is to speak a message of hope and faith in a world that is increasingly sceptical and fighting against the dogma of religion. It was French philosopher Voltaire who said, in 100 years from now, the Bible will have passed into the mists of history as people become more liberated and enlightened. Well, Voltaire lived some 100 years ago, and we could argue that we have certainly become more liberated and enlightened as a society, yet in the last 50 years, some 3.9 billion copies of the Bible have still been published. So it seems it hasn't completely vanished into the vaults of history. To use the term Pentecostal is an interesting angle in that it's quite fashionable in the social media circles now, and maybe that's because we have a Pentecostal Prime Minister. The term itself was essentially born out of a citywide festival called Pentecost that, not unlike Dark Mofo, drew together thousands of people, tens of thousands of people. And it was during this festival that we read that the church embraced the Holy Spirit, and as a result they grew, spreading right across the region. Interestingly though, as the church grew, so did the resentment and the environment of skepticism and fear. Within this very brief history lesson lies a key that society can learn from some 2,000 years later. And that is the fact that ultimately the early church grew not from preaching what they were against, but instead living out what they were for. I'm an advocate to say that no movement, commercial product, or idea generally succeeds in the long term by disparaging what is wrong, or maybe what they believe is wrong, but instead by embracing what you ultimately believe is right. It may not change what others believe, but it certainly can change the way things are received. A program such as this is designed to invoke thought and to answer the question why I'm Pentecostal, or maybe more accurately, why I believe what I believe. I felt it best to give you 3 principles that I adopt not only in my life as a pastor, but in the way I live. The first is this: I'm not trying to be religious, I'm meeting people where they're at. One of the most common lines that I hear from people in conversation is that they're fed up with religion. Well, partially so am I. Which is why I'm not talking about religion, I'm talking about Jesus Christ. The common perception is that Jesus is squarely placed in the box of being a religious leader. Therefore, your success as being a Jesus follower is based on the requirements to abide by a series of religious-based instructions that are above and beyond the common laws of the land. Yet the history of the day recorded in the Bible shows that time and time again we read that Jesus wanted nothing to do with the religious leaders. And in fact, on more than one occasion called them hypocrites. It was that whether it was by breaking the rules, by healing a sick person on the prescribed Sabbath day, or by choosing not to ceremonially wash his hands before a meal, the religious leaders saw Jesus as a complete renegade. For context, let me share with you how Jesus approached the issue of religion. He did it by meeting people where he was at. On one occasion, he detoured into a foreign region, a place called Samaria, whereby he broke down religious and cultural barriers by engaging with a woman in a public place. A woman who had been shunned by her own community for the simple fact that she had broken religious and cultural rules of the day. And although he did address some areas of her life that were busted up, he spoke a message to this woman that was full of hope and love, not judgment and regret. When I question those who say to me they are fed up with religion, it normally boils down to their understanding that it's hypocrisy, or maybe we can call it inconsistency. And that inconsistency spread right across the board in religions. As I said earlier, I worked in a Middle Eastern country, and I truly loved my time there. They treated me extremely well. It was a country that embraced religion and tradition possibly like none other. And as a trained paramedic and actually the clinical director of the ambulance service, I was afforded access into areas of religious culture that on most occasions would not be kosher at all. In fact, on more than one instance, I was solely responsible for the out-of-hospital delivery of babies for Muslim ladies. And some were not emergency situations, but more pre-planned home births. Yet on arrival, to hand over the mum and baby to the hospital, I would be promptly stopped at the front door with a no male access sign allowed and a do not go any further matron standing in my way, yet I'd just delivered the baby. As a pastor, I can't stop people calling me religious, but I can work very hard to lead a culture that is prepared to meet people and walk the journey no matter where they're at. The second point is this: I'm trying not to be relevant, I'm attempting to be authentic. Within the walls of the church, cultural relevance has become a battleground, with the question constantly being asked, are we expected to keep up with a culture that redefines itself every couple of years? The answer is no. The reality is that churches attract a wide demographic, and what may be relevant to me is not relevant to my 17-year-old daughter or my 71-year-old mum. And furthermore, what is relevant today is not relevant tomorrow. The point is that relevancy is what culture accepts at the time. And if that is the barometer, then Christianity was never relevant. In fact, during the times of the early church, Rome ruled the world. Pagan practices were accepted as cultural norms. Most of the civilized world worshipped Zeus, Apollo, Aphrodite, and other gods. Within society, generally women were oppressed and slaves were viewed as second-class citizens. For Christians to be relevant would have to be adoption of these principles. Yet it seems in recent years, pastors have been told that they and their congregations need to be more relevant with culture in order to be able to reach it. That we can only relate to someone who wears ripped jeans if we have ripped jeans. That we can only relate to somebody who's got tattoos if we have tattoos. The question is, though, has the church transformed culture, or has culture transformed the church? And maybe more poignant is the question, has the church's influence within culture increased or decreased? Or indeed, possibly the most important question, is it even relevant to be relevant? Time would preclude me from trying to answer with any substance. But what I can say is that why I'm a Christian has nothing to do with being relevant, but with being authentic. You see, to preach the relevance of the Bible is tough to comprehend for a single mum who's twice divorced, who's struggling to pay the bills, who's running her kids to soccer games every weekend, who's missing appointments and is battling increased health bills because her youngest child has asthma. But being authentic means providing a care network that can walk alongside her, direct her to people, programs that can help her in parenting and financial support, and be a place of safety where she can feel helped, not harassed. To preach the relevance of the Bible story of Daniel in the lion's den, where he survived a cage full of lions without a scratch, is not going to cut it for a 50-year-old CEO whose board is vying for blood, whose addictions to pain meds is increasing, who hasn't made love to his wife in months, and whose kids don't even know him anymore. But being authentic means being real and honest with them. It means being prepared to stop, buy them a coffee, don't expect one back from them. Be a listening ear. Be prepared to share a pint and watch a game of football with them. As Voltaire alluded to, the challenge I face as a Pentecostal pastor is that there are many who are willing to call Jesus a great leader from the past, but one who is not relevant to their lives today. Which is why I lead by not trying to be relevant, but by being authentic. And the third principle is this: I'm not trying to be righteous, I'm trying to be real about my own imperfections. Renowned 19th century preacher Charles Spurgeon once said this: "The greatest enemy to human souls is a self-righteous spirit which makes men look to themselves for salvation." We live in a culture that hates being told how to live. We live in a world that tolerates everything but righteous judgment. We've all heard it said before, who are you to judge? And ultimately the church has shouldered much of that blame. But we need to remember that we are a society that is actually always continually judging others. Job interviews are a judgment on whether you believe someone is capable or not to do the job. Social media is just one big comparative judgment of who has what and who doesn't. Within our Australian culture, we almost demand the entitlement of our opinion. And the side effect is that we won't always agree. But disagreement doesn't have to lead to judgment. This doesn't mean that we tolerate all actions and that all actions are morally or truthfully relative. It does not mean that we can't speak out what is right and wrong. The reality is if we put the same righteous test on ourselves, then we will always fall short of the mark. Jesus listened to all sorts of opinions every day. And he challenged the culture, not by being righteous, not by declaring that people were useless and had no more chances, but by being prepared to meet people where they were at and providing a message of hope. Ultimately, why I'm Pentecostal is not about being holier than thou. It's about embracing the opportunity to walk the journey with people, demonstrating faith and building authentic relationships with them. In conclusion, at the end of the day, we all believe in something. By faith, I believe in God. By faith, others believe there is no God. It was again C.S. Lewis who said this: Christianity, if false, is of no importance, and if true, is of infinite importance. The one thing it can't be is moderately important. Why I believe what I believe, why I'm prepared to stand and say what I believe, is because I've had a lifetime experiencing the proof of God within and around my life. And if at the end of my natural time I am proven wrong in what I believe, then many may have the opportunity to rightly laugh at me. But if my faith in God is as I believe, then the reward is of eternal importance. Thank you very much.